Welcome to Chess Dog. Today we may have what is very well the greatest Jobava London System game ever played. Now, I've covered the Jobava London quite a bit on this channel, but this game blows my mind. It has no less than 5 sacrifices from the white side, played by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Anish, Giri has black. This is the Aim Chess Rapid. Each side has 15 minutes with a 10-second increment. Let's jump right in and take a look at this amazing game. Mamedyarov begins with d4, as you must when you're playing the Jobava London system. Knight f6, knight c3, d5, and bishop to f4. The starting position of the Jobava London, the immediate threat is to play knight to b5, aiming at the c7 square. And after e6, that's exactly what Mamedyarov does. He plays the knight to b5, aiming to take with check, forking the king and the rook. So in order to stop that, Anish Giri plays knight to a6. This is all theory, nothing new here. e3, opening the position up for the f1 bishop, bishop to e7, and h4. The main move here is knight to f3, but after h4, it sort of transposes. This particular move, very aggressive, and it scores well. The idea is to launch the pawn up the board, press on the king side. You could play rook h3, g3 maybe at some point, but basically gaining space on the king side. Castles, knight to f3, and c6. So the first thing he does is kick that b5 knight back. The knight goes to c3, and the main move for black here is c5, but he plays queen to b6 in this position. After c5, it helps add pressure to d4, but immediately attacking the b2 pawn, the main response is rook to b1 to defend that pawn. But Mamedyarov with white instead plays the move a3, which is actually a novelty here, and that b2 pawn is poisoned. If black takes it, the knight to a4, and that queen has nowhere to go. The queen is actually trapped at that point, so Giri, being 2700, will not fall for that. c5, and here he attacks the center, and here Mamedyarov makes a very strange decision. He takes the knight with the bishop, and I'm not exactly sure why he did this, and computers don't even love it, but I thought about it, and I think what he's trying to do is actually clear out this bishop. He's saying that's a hard bishop to develop. If you go to d3, then just c4, kicks it back. And if you go to e2, it gets in the way of the queen. So he just takes the knight off the board and doesn't worry about it anymore, just gets it out of the way. So queen to a6, controlling f1, so white can't castle, but he probably doesn't want to castle short anyway. h5, gaining space, h6, stopping, and here comes the very first sacrifice of 5 in this game. Mamedyarov plays the move g4, threatening to play g5 and open up the position. It was probably better for Giri to decline the sacrifice with knight to h7, but to control this square in front of the pawn. But I'm glad that he did not do that. Instead, Giri took the sacrifice, played knight takes g4, but now rook to g1. And this rook is now on a half-open file, aiming at black's king. And black cannot play knight to f6, because bishop takes h6 is too powerful. The bishop cannot be taken because of the pin. He's hitting the g7 square. That would be a disaster for black. So what Giri does is he plays f5. Basically, he defends the knight on g4 with the pawn and tries to clog up that g file. Knight to e5. Hits the knight, centralizes white's own knight, and now pawn takes and pawn takes. Queen d4 is playable, but it's not an easy move for white. This is an uncomfortable little pin, so he plays the more natural human move, e d4, continuing to support that knight on e5. Now bishop to f6 was played. The best move, probably queen to b6, hitting the pawn at d4 and threatening to take the pawn at b2 at some point. But bishop f6 does challenge the knight on e5. And now comes the second sacrifice in this game. Mamedyarov plays rook takes g4. He doesn't want to take with the knight. That would be a little tricky. You take here, and then, of course, there's a double attack on the rook and the bishop. So he takes with the rook, after pawn takes, queen to g4. So Giri sees that there's a possibility that Mamedyarov is going to have a very powerful attack on the king side, so he plays b5. The idea, he's threatening b4. The pawn can't be taken because there's a pin on this a file, and if white decides to castle long, this pawn can open up a lot of dangerous lines. So b5 is a very strong idea here, but white just ignores it and plays bishop takes h6 with potential threats against the g7 pawn, which is defended at the moment, but is under pressure. And here, queen to b7 was played. If he had just gone ahead with b4, then bishop takes an h6, threatening mate. And if queen to b7 to defend, now you can just take the pawn, and the queen couldn't take because it would be mate at g7. So Giri plays queen to b7 first, defending the bishop at g7 laterally, the pawn at g7, excuse me. So long castles and a5. Now here comes sacrifice number 3, and it is the most amazing sacrifice perhaps in the entire game. Black is threatening to play b4 and coming in on that queen side, so Mamedyarov just takes the pawn. He just takes it. Just looks like it's just dropping a piece, but the idea is actually to distract this queen from g7 and from the king side. Truly amazing chess. Giri takes the offered material. Now the queen is distracted from g7, so now bishop takes g7. Sacrifice number 4 is played in this game. The bishop recaptures, and now h6 with the threat of mate on g7. Anish Giri plays rook to a7 to cover that square. But now another brilliant move. It looks like he's coming in to g1 to pile on to this square, but in fact Mamedyarov instead plays rook to h1 with the idea of h7 check followed by knight to g6 mate. Truly powerful, powerful stuff. Rook to f6 was a possibility here, but after pawn takes, rook takes, queen to h4, white is completely winning. In fact, white has like a forced mate in 9 here, according to the computers. Queen to h8 mate is the current threat. So what Giri decides to do is to play rook to f2. And this is a pretty powerful move. The basic threat is rook to f1 check, which would give black a winning position. After rook takes, king d2, queen f2 check, say king d1, then rook to c7, black would be threatening mate on c2. And if after c3 to stop that, just queen to b2, and black would be winning. So rook to f2 has a serious threat connected to it. So Mamedyarov has to act fast. So white plays h7 check. Now, obviously, you can't play king to h8 because then knight to g6 would be checkmate. So basically, king to f8 is forced. And here comes sacrifice number 5, cinco. Queen takes g7 check, a queen sacrifice of all things. Now, black takes with the king, then white promotes. The queen is backed up by the rook at h1 with check. Actually, no, this is checkmate. Yeah, plain and simple. So just a checkmate if he takes with the king. So he has to take with the rook, but now the pawn advances with check. Rook to g8 to block it, and now knight to g6 check, and the king has to move away to e8. If the king goes to f7, then white mates. I'll show you. It's a fairly long sequence. Rook h7 check, king g8, queen g8 check, and this is going to be a forced mate. Eventually, he just chases him down. Queen to d4 would be mate. So he has to move away from the rook. King to e8, queen takes g8 check, king d7, knight to e5 check, king to d6. So after sacrificing 5 pieces, including a queen, how does Mamedyarov finish off this Jobava London masterpiece with the move knight to d3? And it's a double attack. The knight is attacking the rook at f2. The queen is attacking the bishop at c8. And in this position, Anish Giri resigned. An absolute amazing game. And if that doesn't make you want to play the Jobava London system, I don't know what will.